As I stood at my boss's front door, something inside me hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorbell, my heart pounding for no reason I could explain. This was just dinner, nothing unusual. But when the door opened, and I saw the way his eyes glistened under the dim porch light, a sinking feeling gripped my chest. I had made a terrible mistake. The email came just before I was about to shut my laptop for the day. Subject: a small celebration. You're invited. I hesitated before clicking it, my finger hovering over the touchpad. It was from my boss. You have done an exceptional job this quarter, and I would love to discuss your future at the company over dinner at my home tonight. Nothing formal, just a casual get-together. Hope to see you at 7 p.m. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. It felt odd. I had been working at the company for a little over a year, and while my boss had always been professional, I would not say we were close. Why was he inviting me to his home? My first instinct was to decline. Something about it did not sit right. A one-on-one dinner at his house? It was not unheard of, but it was definitely unusual. Yet, as I thought about it, another part of me rationalized that this could be an opportunity. He mentioned my future at the company. Could this mean a promotion? A raise? I typed out a polite response, accepting the invitation, and pressed send before I could second-guess myself. By the time evening rolled around, I was dressed in something simple yet professional, a navy blouse and black slacks. Nothing that could be misinterpreted. Still, as I drove toward his neighborhood, an uncomfortable weight settled in my chest. The moment I pulled into his driveway, that feeling intensified. His house was too perfect. It stood at the end of a quiet street, a large modern structure with pristine windows and a well-maintained lawn. The air around it was eerily still. No sounds of neighbors chatting, no cars passing by. Just an unnatural silence pressing down on me. I turned off my car but did not move immediately. Instead, I sat there for a few seconds, gripping the steering wheel. Why did I feel so uneasy? This was my boss, not some stranger. Before I could overthink it further, I grabbed my bag and stepped out. As I approached the door, I noticed a small detail that sent a shiver down my spine. There was no doorbell. Instead, the door had a single brass knocker, polished to a gleaming shine, as if it had been recently wiped. The wood around it looked untouched, like no one had used it in years. I knocked lightly, then stepped back, my pulse quickening for reasons I could not explain. The response was immediate, almost too immediate. The door swung open, and there he stood. "Ah, you made it!" His voice was smooth, warm, but his eyes lingered on me for just a second too long. I forced a polite smile. "Of course, thanks for inviting me." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated briefly before stepping over the threshold. The inside of his house was immaculate. Every piece of furniture looked carefully placed, sterile, untouched. The lighting was dim, warmer than necessary, casting elongated shadows across the sleek hardwood floor. I glanced around, expecting to hear some background noise. A TV, music, the hum of a dishwasher, but there was nothing. Just silence. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, locking the door behind me with a soft click. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overanalyzing. But my stomach tightened slightly at the sound of the lock sliding into place. He led me into the dining room, where a perfectly set table awaited. Candles flickered in the dim light, reflecting off the polished silverware. The entire setup looked like something out of a catalog, almost staged. "I hope you are hungry," he said with a smile. I nodded, pulling out a chair. As I sat down, my fingers lightly brushed against the armrest. It was smooth, too smooth, almost as if it had been recently polished. I forced myself to ignore the details and focus. This was just dinner. A work dinner. He poured me a glass of wine without asking, his movements fluid, controlled. "You know," he began, settling into his own chair, "I have been watching you for a while." I froze for half a second before forcing a smile. Oh? I hope that is a good thing. Of course. He chuckled, but something about it felt rehearsed. You are ambitious, dedicated. I like that. Thank you. I reached for the wine, but something inside me stopped. Instead, I let my hand drop back to my lap. He tilted his head slightly, watching me with unreadable eyes. Not a drinker? Not tonight. The smile on his lips did not falter, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of disappointment? He took a sip from his own glass before setting it down carefully. Tell me, he said, leaning forward slightly. Do you enjoy working at the company? I nodded. Yes, it has been a great experience so far. Good. His fingers drummed lightly against the table. I want to know more about you, outside of work. I let out a nervous laugh. There is not much to tell. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, I doubt that. A pause. Then his tone softened. Too soft. You are single, right? My body tensed. The question came so casually, but it did not belong in this conversation. I forced another laugh, trying to steer the discussion back. I prefer to keep my personal life separate from work. He smiled, but there was something behind it. Something that made my skin crawl. Come on, he said smoothly. We are just talking. I reached for my phone, pretending to check the time. It is getting late. I should probably... You came all this way. His voice was calm, too calm. My stomach twisted as I looked up. His eyes were locked onto mine, dark and unmoving. Leaving so soon would be rude. The words hung in the air like a warning. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. It is just that I have an early morning. Stay a little longer, he interrupted, still smiling, but his fingers tightened around his glass. A trickle of unease crept up my spine. This was not a request. My heart pounded against my ribs. I needed to leave. Now. But something in his expression told me he was not going to let me. The air inside the house felt heavier than before. I could not tell if it was the warmth of the dim lights or the way my boss's gaze clung to me, analyzing every shift in my expression. The room was silent except for the faint clink of his glass against the table as he took a slow sip of his wine. Stay a little longer. His voice was smooth, too smooth, yet there was something behind it, something unspoken. I forced a smile, even as a ripple of unease crawled up my spine. It is really getting late. I should... You came all this way. His tone remained light, but there was an unmissable weight beneath it. A warning. I shifted in my seat, my fingers brushing against the napkin on my lap, twisting it between my hands. Calm down. You are overreacting. It is just a dinner. Nothing has actually happened. Still, my gut twisted as I reached for my phone, pretending to check the time. My fingers hovered over the screen. No signal. A cold bead of sweat formed at my temple. That does not mean anything. It could just be bad reception. But then I noticed something. There was no Wi-Fi either. I glanced at him. His face was unreadable, his expression relaxed, as if he was enjoying the moment. The air in the room felt thinner. My thoughts were racing now. I needed a reason to step away, to get my bearings. I let out a nervous laugh, pushing my chair back slightly. I actually need to use the restroom. Could you point me in the right direction? For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation? But then his lips curled into an easy smile, and he gestured down the hallway. First door on the left. I nodded, getting up as casually as I could. My steps felt too loud on the hardwood floor as I walked away from the table. The weight of his gaze followed me, lingering against my back. I reached the hallway and exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers to my temples. I need to leave, now. But before I could take another step, something caught my eye. The hallway was lined with framed photographs. At first, they seemed ordinary. Shots of the house, a few landscapes. But as I looked closer, My stomach twisted into knots. Faces. Women's faces. Some of them had been blurred, others scratched out entirely. Their eyes seemed hollow, distant, like they had been erased. I took a slow, shaky breath. What is this? Who are these women? The air around me thickened, and suddenly, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a cage. I turned toward the front door, my heart hammering. I just needed to leave. Now. But as I reached for the handle, it did not move. I tried again, twisting harder. Nothing. Panic started to build inside me, pressing against my ribs like a vice. The lock was engaged. He had locked the door. I swallowed hard, turning to glance over my shoulder. The dining room was out of view, but I knew he was still there, sitting at the table, waiting. I forced myself to breathe. Think. Stay calm. I reached for my phone again, holding it up to the screen. Still no service. A horrible realization clawed at the edges of my mind. This was not an accident. I needed a new plan. My eyes darted toward the hallway again. Maybe there was a back door? A window? I moved carefully, keeping my steps light as I made my way down the corridor. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached for the handle of a side door, trying it gently. Locked. Another door. Locked. My breathing grew shallow. Every exit I tried was sealed. Then a shadow flickered against the wall. I turned sharply, my breath catching. He was standing at the end of the hallway. His hands were at his sides, relaxed, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way he was watching me. His smile was gone. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My tongue felt heavy, my throat dry. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Just getting some air." He took a step forward. "There is no need for that." My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. I took an instinctive step back and his eyes darkened. "You are not leaving yet." The way he said it sent a cold chill racing down my spine. This is wrong. This is very wrong. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed. Do not show fear. I let out another shaky laugh. "I just remembered, I have an early morning meeting. I should probably—" I said. He took another step. "You are not leaving yet." Something inside me snapped. "Run." I turned sharply and bolted. My feet pounded against the floor as I sprinted toward the front door. Locked. I spun toward the windows. My fingers clawed at the latches. Sealed shut. A quiet chuckle filled the room. He was enjoying this. I turned just as he stepped closer. "There is no need to be afraid," he said, his voice almost amused. "You should stay a little longer." His eyes flickered toward the dining table where the untouched wine still sat. My stomach twisted. Did he put something in it? I had not drunk a sip. And now he knew that. A slow smile stretched across his lips. "You are smarter than the others." The words hit me like a freight train. The others? The air around me felt suddenly suffocating. I needed to get out of here. Now I took a step back, but he mirrored me. One step forward, 2 steps closer. My back hit the wall. He tilted his head slightly. "I was hoping you would stay longer." My skin crawled. Then his hand moved toward his pocket. Something inside me screamed to act. I lunged for the nearest object, a small sculpture from the shelf, and threw it with all my strength. It shattered against his arm, buying me a split second. I did not wait. I ran. I darted down the hall, turning sharply into the unknown. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached for another door. It opened. But what I saw inside made my stomach drop. The room was filled with old belongings. Dresses, shoes, personal items. Things that did not belong to him. The realization hit me like ice water. They belonged to them, the missing women, the ones in the photographs. My heart slammed against my ribs. This was not just a dinner. This was a trap. And I had just walked straight into it. The room felt like it was closing in around me, the air thick and suffocating, pressed against my lungs as my eyes darted between the door and the man standing between me and freedom. My boss, no, the monster standing in front of me, was not just toying with me. He was waiting, watching, studying my every move. I could still hear the faint echoes of my own panicked breaths from moments ago. The walls of this house were not just walls. They were silent witnesses to something much worse. To the women before me, to the ones who never got out. The room behind me was proof of that. The photographs in the hallway, the personal belongings tucked away like trophies, the women whose eyes had been scratched out. I was not his first victim, and if I did not act now, I would not be his last. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as he stepped forward, the soft click of his shoes against the floor making my pulse thunder in my ears. "You understand now, do you not?" His voice was calm, disturbingly so, like this was all a game, like I was just another piece on his board. They all think they can leave. At first. I took a step back. My body was screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The doors were locked. The windows, reinforced. My only chance was him. I had to outthink him. I forced my expression to remain neutral, swallowing the terror clawing its way up my throat. If I let him see my fear, I was already dead. "What do you want?" My voice was hoarse, but I kept it steady. He tilted his head, studying me. "Want?" A small chuckle escaped his lips. "Want is such a strong word. I simply enjoy the company." His fingers curled around something small, something metallic. A key. He turned it over between his fingers like it meant nothing. But I knew better. That key was my way out. I needed to get it. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through possibilities. If I lunged for it, he would see it coming. If I ran, he would be faster. If I screamed, no one would hear me. But I had one advantage. He still thought he was in control. I let my shoulders relax slightly, forcing myself to look down, pretending to be defeated. "You are right," I whispered. "I should not have come here." He smiled, hooked. "You are smarter than the others," he murmured. "You do not fight right away. That is what makes this fun." Fun. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. He took another step, now just a foot away from me. Close enough for me to see the way his pupils dilated in the dim light, the way his breath slowed as he drank in my hesitation. He liked this. The power. The fear. My fingers twitched toward the counter behind me. A weapon. I needed a weapon. Then I saw it. A glass bottle sitting near the edge of the table. His eyes flicked down for half a second. That was all I needed. I lunged, grabbing the bottle and swinging it with everything I had. The crash was deafening. Glass shattered against his shoulder, and for the first time, I saw something other than amusement in his eyes. Shock. Pain. I did not wait for him to recover. I ran. I sprinted toward the door, my heart slamming against my ribs. My hands fumbled against the lock, yanking, twisting. It did not budge. Number no. Behind me, a low growl of frustration. "You should not have done that." I turned just in time to see him lunge. I barely dodged, my body slamming into the counter. My hand landed on something cold. A knife. I grabbed it, spinning to face him. He stopped. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Blood trickled from a small cut on his arm, staining the sleeve of his perfect, crisp shirt. And then he laughed. Low, quiet, too calm. "Go ahead," he murmured, spreading his arms slightly. "Do it." My fingers trembled around the knife handle. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Could I do it? Could I really? The lights flickered. Then everything went black. My breath hitched. Total darkness. And then something worse. A sound. A whisper. A voice that was not his. "Run." The blood in my veins turned to ice. I could not see anything, but I could feel it. Another presence in the room. I took a slow step back, The floor creaked beneath me. My breath was too loud. I was not alone anymore, and neither was he. He stiffened. "No," he muttered under his breath. "Not now." I turned toward where I had last seen him, but he was no longer standing in front of me. Then, a sharp crash. A chair toppled over. A gasp that was not mine. A shuffling sound, quick and sudden. I took another step back, my pulse hammering. Then, silence. Total silence. The kind that made my ears ring. I gripped the knife tighter, my hands slick with sweat. What just happened? "Hello?" My voice barely left my throat. Nothing. And then, a breath, right, behind. I spun, slashing the knife wildly, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. The darkness seemed to press closer, swallowing the room whole. A cold whisper brushed against my ear. "You are too late." The light snapped back on, and he was gone. The chair he had been sitting in was toppled over. The glass bottle shards glistened on the floor. But he was not there. My breath came in short gasps as I scanned the room. Where did he go? I turned, sprinting toward the nearest door, and found it wide open. I froze. It had been locked, sealed shut. Now it stood ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting into knots. Had he escaped? Or had something else taken him? And more importantly, was I really safe? The silence in the room was unnatural, deafening. My breath was the only sound, sharp and uneven, each inhale trembling as if the air had thickened around me. My grip tightened around the knife, my fingers slick with sweat. He was gone, vanished. But I knew better than to believe that meant I was safe. Then, in the silence, a sound. Footsteps. Not his. A slow, deliberate shuffle across the wooden floor. I turned sharply, my pulse hammering against my ribs, but there was no one there. The room stood exactly as it had before. The broken glass from the bottle still scattered across the floor, the overturned chair still resting on its side. And yet, I was not alone. A whisper drifted through the darkness. So faint, I almost thought I imagined it. My name. I froze. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but something about it felt wrong. Like it came from somewhere distant, somewhere it should not have. I fumbled in my pocket, my shaking fingers barely managing to grip my phone. Still no signal. But I turned on the screen, using its dim glow to scan the room. My breath caught in my throat. The shadows were moving. Not shifting with the light, not bending to my phone's weak glow, but moving. Crawling along the edges of the walls, curling into shapes that made no sense, figures that should not exist. I stumbled back, my foot colliding with something hard. I turned. A door. It was slightly open, just barely ajar, as if someone had been waiting for me to find it. I did not hesitate. I ran. Bursting through the doorway, my feet pounded against the floor as I sprinted down the darkened hall. The air grew colder with each step, thick with something unseen, something watching. Behind me, I heard him. My boss's voice, but not like before. He was pleading. No, not me, not this time. My heart seized in my chest. I wanted to look back. I wanted to see what had stopped him, what had suddenly flipped our roles in this sick game. But instinct screamed at me. Keep running. I did not stop. I did not slow. I reached the end of the hallway, another door looming before me. I grabbed the handle, yanking hard. It opened. I staggered inside and nearly collapsed. The room, it was wrong. Not just eerie, not just disturbing. Completely wrong. It was filled with belongings. Dresses hung limply on hooks along the walls. Shoes, purses, jewelry. Things that did not belong here. Things that belonged to them, the missing women. Their things were everywhere, arranged so perfectly it felt unnatural, not like a collection, like a shrine. My chest tightened, bile rising in my throat. He had kept their things, as if he still owned them, as if they had never left. A whisper, right against my ear. You should not have come here." I spun around, my phone's light shaking wildly, and I saw her. She stood at the other end of the room, barely illuminated by the weak glow of my screen. A woman. Her dress was tattered, her hair falling in limp strands around her face. But it was her eyes. They were hollow, dark voids, stretching into nothing. She was smiling, not kindly, not human. The shadows around her twisted unnaturally, stretching along the walls like living things. I staggered back, colliding with a shelf. Something toppled over. A photo frame. I glanced down. The glass had cracked, but through it, I could still see the picture inside. It was her, and she was wearing the same dress. A cold, suffocating dread wrapped around my throat. This was one of them, one of the women he had taken. But she was still here. She never left. My hands trembled as I pressed against the door, but before I could turn the handle, a new sound, a choking gasp. From the hallway, my boss. I turned, my entire body locked in terror. He was standing just beyond the threshold. His face, it was not his anymore. His eyes were wide with horror, his expression contorted in something beyond fear. He was looking right at her, his mouth opened, lips trembling. She never left. His voice cracked. They all never left. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came out in frozen puffs. Then the lights went out again, and the screaming started. It was not just him. It was them. Dozens of voices, crying, laughing, whispering. I could not see anything, but I could feel it. Something moved past me, brushing against my skin. I clawed at the door handle, my fingers barely working, twisting, turning. It would not move. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around my ears, sinking into my bones. My name. Over and over. A chorus of voices that did not belong to the living. A hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed, jerking back, my body slamming into the wall. The whispers swelled, filling the entire space, and suddenly, the door flung open. I fell through, collapsing onto the floor outside. My body hit the cold ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, searching. But the room behind me was empty. The shrine was gone. The woman was gone. He was gone. The house was silent. Too silent. My pulse thundered in my ears as I staggered back, barely able to process what had happened. I turned toward the front door. It was open. It had been locked, sealed shut. Now it stood ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. I took a shaky step forward, every instinct screaming at me to run and never look back. But as I reached the threshold, I hesitated. A feeling slithered through my chest. Wrong. Unfinished. I turned, my breath still uneven. And there, just beyond the dim glow of my phone, a figure. Watching. The woman. She stood just beyond the doorway, still smiling, still hollow, but this time she spoke. "You are one of us now." A sharp, searing coldness shot through my spine. The lights flickered. And then, everything went black.